Shalom from Jerusalem. This is TV7's Israel at War update. As we continue to deliberate daily the various developments both here in Israel, throughout the region, and beyond, it's always important to remember how this war started. 223 days ago, on October 7th, the Islamist terror groups from the Hamas-plagued Gaza Strip launched an onslaught on southern Israel, declaring war by perpetrating a heinous massacre, murdering some 1,200 mostly civilians, wounding over 4,800 others, and kidnapping 246 people, including elderly, men, women, children, and infants. 132 of them remain in Hamas captivity to date. Let's now turn to our TV7 editor-at-large, Mr. Amir Oren. Amir, what can you update us with on the latest?
So, several issues are on the agenda today. Tomorrow, probably, or if not the next day, the man-made pier, the J-Lots causeway to the shore of Gaza, will be ready and available for the transfer of aid from vessels coming from Cyprus, then offloading it into other U.S. Army and U.S. Navy boats, and then on to trucks, which will make their way into Gaza. This will be done with no American military presence on the ground. The Israel Defense Forces supposedly will secure the area, and then NGOs will take over the distribution. 5 Israeli paratroopers were killed by their own forces, by mistake, of course, by tank shells in Jabalia, which is in the northern part of Gaza. And there is quite a dispute now between Defense Minister Gallant and Prime Minister Netanyahu regarding the end state of the campaign in Gaza, with Netanyahu in opposition to any political solution before Hamas is dismantled, and Gallant, along with the military chiefs and several members of the Israeli war cabinet, coming out in favor of some grouping of Arab and Arab nations and the Palestinian Authority in order to replace the Hamas governing mechanism in Gaza.
Indeed. Well, let's focus initially on the humanitarian efforts being undertaken, and for that I'd like to ask the commander of the Israeli Air Force Task Force for Air and Missile Defense, namely Brigadier General in Reserve Doron Gavish, with regard to security arrangements. Naturally, such a pier is a target, a floating target, if I may call it that way, and plenty of arrangements to secure the U.S. forces transiting this aid into the hands of NGOs are in the making. What can you tell us about that, and what are the deep concerns with regard to such a complex operation?
Well, indeed, Jonathan, you called it a floating target, but it is really challenging. We have to remember this is a U.S. initiative, and of course, everything is being done in a coordinated way. But at the end of the day, this is a decision of the United States, and all the measures that needs to be taken will be taken. Indeed, it is a question if the Hamas would decide to attack directly the United States, basically, while they are coming in a humanitarian effort. That's a big question, but of course, this is one of the risks. This is something that is being taken into consideration, and measures are being taken in order to defend this pier. Everything is being done by the United States, of course. So it's there. it's going to be operated probably in the next coming days, and we would see how the Hamas is going to behave toward it. I'm not sure that it would be smart from their point of view to attack this pier, but you never know what are those guys' calculations. At the end of the day, they are terrorists, and they are number one. They are looking to arm who they understand as their enemy.
Indeed. It's always also important to cite different instances that occurred over the course of the past several days, and that is before Israel's entry into Rafah, the eastern sector of Rafah, the Islamist Hamas launched a couple of mortars from the vicinity of the Rafah border crossing towards the Kerem Shalom border crossing, both of which are entry points for humanitarian aid. So it doesn't seem like this Islamist terrorist organization is too concerned about the various complexities of providing humanitarian aid to the population in the Gaza Strip. But let's now turn to the former chief of the intelligence directorate at Mossad, namely Brigadier General Reserve Amnon Sofrin. It's good to see you, General. I'd like to immediately dive into the remarks made by Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant. He basically said that a coherent policy for the day after needs to be implemented, which does not entail Israel's recapture of the Gaza Strip, nor as a governing civil administrator of the needs of the Gaza Strip, nor a military entity to provide for security, but rather to find alternatives in which the Palestinian entity, he did not necessarily specify the Palestinian Authority, but a Palestinian entity would assume control of the Gaza Strip for both those purposes. What can you tell us about that? Prime Minister Netanyahu, of course, already mentioned in his own address that preceded that of Defense Minister Gallant that attempts were made to try and involve local clans within the Gaza Strip, which have failed in the past several months, and in order to make any viable solution possible for local clans in the Gaza Strip to take part in the day after, so-called, the Islamist Hamas will need to be eradicated completely. Of course, completely is a very strong definition. Nonetheless, what can you tell us about that?
If you look at the situation in Gaza, it has two dimensions. The first one is what we call the military side. And the IDF is fighting Hamas. It didn't dismantle Hamas totally because many Hamas activists fled from the area of Khan Yunis and Rafah into the northern part of Gaza, and are engaging the IDF. And we see that they fight in Jabalia, and they fight in Zaytun, and they fight in other neighborhood of Gaza, places that we've been before. And now they get back, and they establish their military power and renewed it. Now, let's say that we are now dismantling the remainings of Hamas in Rafah. What comes next? Hamas is controlling the area totally on the civilian side, and there's no other solution. As long as there's no other entity, you name it, and I will explain in a minute, that will roll the Gaza for on the civilian side, Hamas is still there, and it's still valid, and it's still controlling the area. Now, there are three main possibilities. The first one is to establish a military control on the civilian side as well, just like we had before, disengaging from Gaza in 2005. The second issue is that we should bring together some Arab countries or units from Arab countries that will be willing to control Gaza, together with the Palestinian Authority, or in combination with, let's say, international units coming out from various countries, to control Gaza for 2 or 3 years, to begin rebuilding all the ruins, and only then to handle it to somebody that can take care of. If you mean only to get the Palestinian Authority inside and to get control on Gaza, they won't succeed doing it because Hamas will not let them control Gaza without any assistance coming out from the outside. They are weak. They won't survive the attacks coming out from Hamas side, just like they did few months ago when, on the northern part of Gaza, when they sent people from the Palestinian Authority trying to get involved with leaders of clans on the northern side to establish what we call local governance. Hamas found that out, killed 2 of them, sent the others outside, back to the West Bank, and told them that beware, if you come back, we are going to kill you. So in a way, you should first of all control the area on the military side, and only then you can bring somebody to control it on the civilian side.
Indeed. Of course, to bring the Palestinian Authority potentially within its current composition or a different composition into a point where it can contend with Islamist Hamas in the Gaza Strip, much more needs to be done. But I'd like to hear the position, of course, joining our panel for that purpose is retired Colonel Joel Rayburn, formerly a senior director of the National Security Council in Washington for Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, Iran, former special envoy for Syria, and currently the founding director of the American Center for Levant Studies. It's good to see you, Colonel. The Biden administration is very keen on seeing the Palestinian Authority assume the role of governance in the Gaza Strip, but with all the aspiration and wishful thinking, if I may call it that way, the Palestinian Authority barely controls the so-called West Bank. Why would it be able to control the Gaza Strip without the necessary support from Arab countries or others in order to bring about such a reality in the first place?
I think it's very clear that no one is going to be able to control the Gaza Strip as long as Hamas is there as a military organization. They have to be destroyed as a military organization, or else none of the day after, post-conflict scenarios has any hope of succeeding at all. So I think that has to be the starting point. Where I think things went awry is that at least several weeks ago, and I think actually several months ago, the Biden administration decided that it was no longer supportive of the military destruction of Hamas, or the destruction of Hamas as a military organization. I think they judged it was either militarily infeasible, which I don't think is true, or they judged that it was politically too costly for them, the United States, the U.S. administration. And so they parted ways with Israeli war objectives at that stage. And now the train wreck that's happening between the White House and the Israeli government, and more than just the Israeli government, I would say the Israeli public, has been coming ever since. It's been this inevitable, on an inevitable collision course. And here we are. And unless the U.S. administration, I think, is going to recalibrate and accept the strategic objective of the destruction of Hamas as a military organization, I don't see how you can proceed to any post-conflict scenario, unless the White House has assumed that it will be Hamas, and that Hamas can be dealt with, and that they're just going to have that outcome as default, and think that there's going to be some broader deal brokered with the same organization that killed more than 30 Americans on October 7th and killed more than 1,200 Israelis. And that, too, is not workable. I think of all the outcomes, of all the scenarios, that is the one that is least feasible for all involved.
Indeed. The social construct in the Gaza Strip is very difficult to deal with, to say the least, considering the fact that all the clans, the first and foremost objective of each clan is survivability. And therefore, those clans are sometimes affiliated to more than just one organization, be it, for instance, General Sofrin mentioned the 2 clan leaders who were killed, one of which was the Durmush family, which has affiliation to multiple organizations, including Fatah, including Hamas, including the Palestinian Popular Resistance, and also, among others, Al-Qaeda. So those organizations are not one line, and this is not necessarily a best solution to come as an alternative to Hamas, but of course we need to make sure that the various options are deliberated, and hopefully the leadership in Jerusalem, in agreement with Washington and other allies and partners throughout the world, but also here in the region, will be able to reach the right objectives. But one issue remains, and that is the Islamic Republic of Iran is the core culprit when we're talking about this conflict. Mr. Owen, let's turn our eyes to the north. Hezbollah has been intensifying cross-border attacks against Israel. What can you tell us about that?
Obviously, over the last several days, Hezbollah managed to penetrate Israeli defenses by drones. Several times, those one-way attack drones did manage to hit Israeli targets, mostly civilian, sometimes with some defense-related characteristics. Now, obviously, the Israeli defense industry, as well as the Air and Missile Defense Command, are working diligently in order to find a solution to this problem. And we are promised that it will be found shortly. But for the time being, the barrages of rockets and the swarms, or mini swarms at least, of drones have made a dent in the Israeli defenses. At the same time, Israel has struck targets in Lebanon and is causing a lot of painful damage for the Radwan force. First of all, the commando force that Hezbollah keeps in South Lebanon and in other targets. So the deadly game is not over. Israel is leading by points, but the end result will only come with a ceasefire.
Indeed. Well, General Gavish, I'd love to hear your perspective on this. Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant, when asked during last night's press conference about when does Hezbollah cross the red line of Israel, noted that when Israel strikes Beirut, that is when everybody will know that Hezbollah had crossed the red line. What needs to be done in order to reach that point, however, since we see civilian casualties, we see military casualties on a near daily basis already?
First, you have to prepare for this mission, and the IDF is ready for it. So it is more a decision of our leaders. This is if the decision would be to go for the offensive. And this is one of the tools within the Israeli toolbox of how to deal with the situation in the northern part of Israel. We have to remember it is not the preferred one, because if there would be other options to solve this problem, this would be better, of course, but we are not very optimistic on this, and this is why the IDF is ready. At this point, we are continuously basically with the same strategy that we saw during the last few months, basically from the beginning of 7th of October, which is active defense. We could say the IDF is still in the defense. It is not in a fully offensive operations in the northern part of Israel, but is quite actively on this defense. And the strikes are not only as a retaliation to what the Hezbollah is doing, there are much more than this. We saw one of the highest leaders that was striked a few days ago. So this is part of the way that Israel is retaliating at this point of time. From the defense point of view, we also have to say that and this is also to what Amir just mentioned. There is no 100% on the defense. We say it again and again and again. And sometimes those drones or those rockets, some percentage of them would be hitting the targets that they wanted to hit. This is something that we have to take into consideration. The defense, by the way, it's not only active defense by intercepting them, it is also passive defense, which is alerting the population or alerting the military installations and going to the shelters. And this is something that basically is being done from day one. But we don't have 100%, and sometimes we would see some of those rockets or UAVs or something like this that they are penetrating. But we also have to say that, on the big scheme, the amount of damages that they are doing is not too effective, but it is terrorizing the northern, of course, arena and the northern part. And of course, we have to remember the civilians that were evacuated from this area. This is more important than anything else. And we'll see. Time will tell. But from the IDF point of view, as the bottom line, the IDF is ready for any decision by the Israeli government.
61,000 Israelis have been displaced on the government's instructions since October 8th. Another 40,000 left on their own volition beyond the 5-kilometer buffer that the government had established from the get-go. General Sofrin, I'd like to hear your perspective on the reports. Maybe you can refute them or confirm them right now, that Iran had basically instructed Hezbollah to intensify cross-border attacks against Israel since the IDF launched its offensive into Rafah. Where are we seeing this activity from an Iranian perspective more so than the Lebanese one?
I'm not sure that I can tell with 100% of guarantees that Iran is beyond that. Let's say that if you look at what Hezbollah is, the way Hezbollah is acting against the IDF and against the residents that are living in the northern part of Israel, you can point out two main phenomena. The first one is they declare that as long as the fighting in Gaza goes on, they will intensify the fire at the northern front. That's A. And they link between those two arenas and they say we're assisting our brothers fighting in Gaza. The second issue is they said that if you are hitting our residents, we are going to hit your residents back, and even stronger than before. And they do so. Now, I'm not sure that Iran is beyond that and that Iran gave direct order to Nasrallah to intensify the fighting. Hezbollah is intensifying the fighting, I think, on its own initiative to prove to us that, first of all, they are not deterred. The second one is that they are willing to, let's say, to elaborate the fighting with Israel, and they are not afraid, and they declare it openly. And the third issue is that they're trying to ease the pressure upon the people that are fighting in Gaza, meaning Hamas, by intensifying the fire at the northern front. Now, when you look at the northern front, I can point out two main points. The first one is they intensify the attacks by UAVs, by kamikaze UAVs, that prove to be efficient. They are succeeding in getting inside Israel, penetrating or overwhelming our defense systems, and hitting residents and hitting soldiers. And if you look from the day one of this war at Lebanon's border, 24 Israelis were killed. On the last months only six people were killed. 2 of them residents and the other 4 are soldiers. That means that we're more vulnerable than we've been before. And if you look at the quantities of drones that are being launched, on February there were 7, on March 24, on April 42 out of them. They double the size of kamikaze UAVs that are being launched. They see that it is efficient and they take advantage of that. Second, they launch rockets into the Golan Heights. They launch rockets into on Hermon Mountain to prove to us that they don't, even though they maintain some equations that they set up, meaning regarding mainly the ranges of fire, and they don't go even deeper into Israel, even though we retaliate and we attack on Baalbek, which is about 100 kilometers northeast of Metula. And they settle up with, let's say, up to 50 kilometers. That was the first time they launched to that range. That means that they keep some low profile still, and they don't want to retaliate and to go into a larger war with Israel.
Indeed. Colonel Rayburn, I'd like to hear your perspective on this, since earlier this week, the Secretary General of Hezbollah, namely Said Hassan Nasrallah, came out and said in his address to his followers that diplomacy will not bring or yield any results, and that Hezbollah will continue to fight so long as the war in Gaza rages, something that Israel, of course, does not take into its calculus, since it will persist irrespective of what Hezbollah claims, so long as the Radwan forces continue to pose those threats to the residents of northern Israel, at least rhetorically speaking. That's what we hear. What can you tell us about that?
Well, in the same way that I always ask, with Hamas and Gaza, is Israel, is the United States facing a Hamas and Gaza problem, or are they facing an Iranian regime regional strategy problem and a front of a much larger Tehran-led axis of resistance? So with respect to Nasrallah, does Israel have a Nasrallah problem? Or does Israel and the United States and everyone else in the region have a Tehran problem, have a Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei problem? I don't pay too much attention to the exact details of what Nasrallah or Naim Qassem or anyone else in Hezbollah says, unless they say something that's new. But I always assume that whatever they're saying, they're essentially articulating what they've been authorized to articulate of Iranian strategy. I think what the United States, Israel, and other allies in the region are facing is that the Iranian regime, having invested an enormous amount in creating these proxies, which are organic essentially to its Revolutionary Guards at this point, are going to fight very hard to preserve them and to hold on to them because this is their strategic deterrent. In the absence of a nuclear weapon, this is what they have to use. And in the absence of any capable conventional forces, they don't have capable conventional forces. So whatever's happening on the northern border is what Ali Khamenei and the Revolutionary Guards want to be happening. And it's to that power center that you need to look in order to reestablish deterrence and make Hezbollah back away.
All right, we have one sentence for each of you. Mr. Owen, we'll start with you. What should we focus on for the next 24 hours?
The spotlight, for some reason, is off Rafah for now, but the IDF is advancing there, has destroyed 8 to 10 terror tunnels and killed some 150 or so terrorists. So little by little, the achievements there are being accumulated.
General Gavish?
Well, indeed, Aza, this is the one thing. And the other thing is that this decision or discussion about the day after is a very important one. And from a strategic level, this is something that needs to be done by Israel.
General Sofrin?
To what extent do the international pressure on Israel will bring Israel to rethink if they're going to get deeper into Rafah or not?
Colonel Rayburn?
I think the United States, little by little, the U.S. administration has made itself into an Israeli political faction, and it needs to stop doing that. Stay out of Israel's internal politics. This is not a superpower's role. It's counterproductive, and it gets down to the point, for example, now the White House is blamed for the defense minister's statement yesterday.
Indeed. Well, this is all the time that we have for today. I'd like to thank Colonel Rayburn, General Sofrin, General Gavish, and Mr. Oren for your insights, and I'd like to thank all of you at home as well. Until our next update from here in Jerusalem. Shalom.